Anitra,
Yes, ma'am.
I think we are ready for you to get started. And as soon as Val gets on the call, she can maybe at the end tell people more about Justice and Beyond, but I don't think we should wait any longer because Dr. Shervington has to leave us at 5:30. So I would love to be able to hear from her.
Okay, well, we'll get started then. Thank you all for coming. My name is Anitra Brown. I'll be moderating this session on juvenile justice, in particular, trying juveniles as adults. We have a very informed panel of individuals who I believe will be able to kind of give us some information that will help us understand better this issue and navigate our way to our own opinions about it. And so really quickly, we have Dr. Denise Shervington of the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies. I'm not sure if Mr. Winn is on yet, but we will have him. He's with the Prison Reform Activists, Priorities, Intentions, and Practical Exchanges. That's called PIPE. We have the Honorable Ranord Darensburg, who is Chief Judge of the Orleans Parish Juvenile Court, and Ashley Hamilton, Policy Director at the Louisiana Center for Children. Is that all correct? Is everyone other than Mr. Winn on? Okay, so I'm going to start with just a general statement. We know that we have issues as it relates to juvenile justice and some serious questions about whether or not juveniles should be tried as adults. And so I want to start with you, Dr. Shervington. What are some of the issues, or from a medical, physical standpoint, the issues or characteristics that come along with the development of the teenage brain, mind, that makes trying these young people as adults a difficult proposition from your standpoint?
Okay, thank you all for having me in this space. I just returned from the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry meeting a couple of weeks in New York, and I know that we're always trying to collaborate, but there's some amazing work being headed by primarily Black child and adolescent psychiatrists on this issue at NYU and UCLA. So I can give you those names if you need anything more, but there's some work being done at Yale. I forget who it is. I'm really honored to be in this space. Let me ask, how much time do I have? Because if I'm going to do an update on the latest neuroscience around the brain, I just need some parameters. It could be a day, it could be 3 minutes. Just give me a sense of how much time I have.
How about 8 to 10 minutes?
Okay, great. I'll be able to really bring the highlights. First of all, let me say that we're in this space because I think as a society, we failed our children. We did not create a moral, equitable universe for them. And so this is really, I'll talk about a child's brain, but it's really about our adult failures. So I just wanted to start there. And so I also wanted to just do a quick little refresh on what is the brain. It is the organ right here in our skull, which is a massive network of neurons bathed in neurotransmitters that are passing information quickly. And primarily what the brain is doing is there to secure our survival. It's the function of the brain is our survival. That's its core task. And so it's constantly seeking the resources we need physiologically to keep our internal organs going, so that 3 things: that we can grow, we can survive, and we can reproduce. And this happens through creating homeostasis and allostasis, which is just making sure that the body can react to the stressors around it. So the brain also one key thing to remember is that the brain is not a reactive organ, it is actually predicting. Our brain is using material from the past to predict the immediate future and what to do, which then becomes our present. And I think that's really important. The brain creates concepts and constructs from the past to help us figure out and predict what to do in the next moment. And a lot of this, in terms of our actions, are driven by our emotions. And our emotions are constructed, again, based on the information that the brain has about what's happening in our organs, what's happening in our environment, and how to make us feel, how to make us act, so that we can survive, we can reproduce, and hopefully we can thrive. So the brain is constantly reacting and trying to predict what the various levels of stress in our bodies mean. So we know there's positive stress, acute, it happens, it's mild, we have all the resources, and we actually learn from positive stress. Then there's a tolerable stress, it's a little bit more than acute and positive, but again, if we have the resources, we're able to get through, and hopefully those things don't happen to us again. When the brain is experiencing toxic stress, and I'm sure everyone here knows that this is what brings this conversation here, or children who are living in environments of toxic stress. Their brains are continuously being activated by stressors, chronic stressors in their society, in their homes, in their schools, in their communities. And this results in the stress response being activated, which I'll talk about a little bit, for the child to determine, should they fight, should they go into flight, should they freeze. And so toxic stress happens when there are stressors, but they're not the resources available for a child to cope and be able to turn that stress either into tolerable stress or positive stress. And what are the sources of these kinds of stress? We know they're the adverse childhood experiences, those adversities that a child experiences before the age of 18. They're growing up in households where there is exposure to abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. There is neglect, physical or emotional neglect, or they're living in households with challenges where caregivers have substance use issues, mental health issues, there's incarceration of a parent or both, or divorce. And there also, if a child has experienced suicide in their household. These are the factors, the domains of the adverse childhood experiences study that showed that if this happens before 18 and if it's cumulative, and especially if it's more than 4 of these experiences, the architecture of the child's brain is going to be impacted, and it is also going to develop other physical health conditions. In addition to these more household experiences, there's now evidence that poverty, discrimination, and war create toxic stress responses in the brain of children. And what that is, I'm sorry, is there a question?
No, I think he was just coming on. Please continue, Dr. Sherman.
Yeah. And so what happens, the stress response we're talking about is the chronic activation of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And what happens in 3 special areas in the brain, the hippocampus, which is responsible for language, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible really to help us to regulate our emotions, to think, and to act in a way that's reasonable. And the amygdala, which is that little organ that's the smoke detector, constantly checking our environment to see, are there threats? Because again, the brain's primary function is our survival. And so when there's chronic toxic stress, these areas of the brain, that area that's the limbic system, becomes dysregulated. And usually the child is constantly on the lookout for danger. The amygdala is extremely hyperactive because the whole idea is don't let this happen to you again. And for those of us who work with these young kids, we know how that area of the brain is. And unfortunately, many of these kids have just been diagnosed with ADHD and not the proper diagnosis that would get them the treatments. In terms of adolescent brain, asked to focus on a little bit more. So imagine you've had all these stressors in the early years and you hit adolescence, which is another period, I think, of just normal challenges for the brain in terms of its development. One, it's going to begin to prune the amount of neurons. It happens twice in brain development that we're aware of, at age 2 and again in adolescence. The brain is beginning to figure out, I don't need all these neurons. I need to just focus on those that I need, and I'm going to not continue to produce and be as plastic. Even though we know overall the brain is quite plastic, in terms of the neurons that we're born with through adulthood, we're losing them. So again, imagine that the child has been living prior to adolescence in conditions of toxic and chronic stress. Also, that area of the brain, the limbic area of the brain, is developing more than the prefrontal cortex. And it's the prefrontal cortex that helps the child be able to be more reasonable and respond more to logic. During adolescence, the limbic area that's more focused on emotions and on checking our environment for safety, it is developing at a faster rate. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is that part that helps us with reasoning, it becomes much more open to the impact of dopamine. Dopamine is that hormone in the body, neurotransmitter, that makes us feel good. This is why young people love to take chances. It is the brain evolutionary trying to get us to be curious, to try new things. And so the teenage brain under normal circumstances is being much more reactive to dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter. So when, in terms of what's happening in an adolescent's brain, if there's early traumas, more than 3 or 4, chronic exposure over time for a child to these stressors, we know that the child is going to need help to manage. They're going to develop trauma-based conditions, whether it's PTSD, anxiety disorders, addictions, or difficulty controlling their feelings of aggression. I don't use the terms conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. That's focusing on the behaviors and not the root cause of why a child is displaying these behaviors. Also, as I call ADHD, it's the lazy diagnosis, when the person did not take the time to understand why is this kid's limbic system, the amygdala in particular, being so hyper-aroused and hyper-reactive. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I didn't take them. And if there are any questions, is this questions?
That was perfect, Dr. Shervinson. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I think we will save those for the end, correct? But I do want to kind of recap what I feel like I heard you saying, sort of in a layman's term. When we're looking at youth, juvenile offenders, those youth who happen to find themselves in the criminal justice system, it should be a difficult proposition to consider trying them as adults because their brains are simply not, they're not thinking like adults. Even though the actions may seem as if they're egregious, they're not, their brains are not developed in the way that an adult's brain is developed. And then when you add to that the trauma, possible instances of abuse, the way that our society has failed many of these young people, it becomes an even more difficult proposition. I'm just kind of making sure I kind of understood what you were saying. So thank you so much. Is Mr. Winn on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, we're gonna go with Terrance. No.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Dr. Shervington, since you'll be leaving at 5:30, could you give us a hint about the new research that you referred to that's
You
being
want the
done in New York?
Oh, yes, I can send you that information. The person, I know the person at UCLA, Dr. Erica Bath. I forget the name of the person at NYU, but they're all colleagues. And they had such a panel at the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry meeting about raising the age. And they have, their data went back to the 17th century. So if you all want some of this material, I'll ask them. I think I can get the information to give to you all, and looked at all the laws in the US from very early on and how we've gotten into this predicament.
Dr. Shervington, I think you have
Thank
Betty
you.
DeMarco's email address.
Mhm.
Would you send that to her and she can help us distribute it?
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, we're going to move on to Mr. Terrance Winn, who's a prison reform activist. The organization is Priorities, Intentions, and Practical Exchanges. And I guess the first question we have for you, Mr. Winn, are, what are your thoughts on about the question, juveniles being tried in as adults, and of course, it's quite likely thoughts and opinion that is informed by your personal experience. So if you could just please share with us the work that you do and how that came to be, and your thoughts on trying juveniles as adults in the criminal justice system.
Okay. I think I'll start here. I think that, all right, the work that I do is I try to help people. I try to help people not make the bad decisions that'll lead you to going to prison. Because there are well-known targets for prison. And we know that there's usually minorities. And so it's like a minority is already projected to fail. And then we'll take on situations because of the way we allow our environments to train us to think and the way that we don't think. So we're just given to our emotions, especially as young kids. Because as kids, like you was reiterating what the doctor was saying, we don't have an off switch. This is what separates a kid from an adult. A kid, if he's angered, all he knows is go. An adult, once he's angered, he know how to rationalize it. And so an adult can say, I want to do you some bodily harm, but I know the consequences of my actions. A kid don't care about the consequences. I just want to do you bodily harm, and I'm gonna do you bodily harm if I can. So I think that it's the biggest contradiction to society to try a kid as an adult because he committed a criminal act. So you got a way to punish the kid for doing something wrong, but you don't have a way to reward a kid for doing everything right. So it's like you just continue to go through life without rewards if it's done, you've done everything properly. But you get this punishment if you've done something wrong. So it's like to say, I'm a 15-year-old kid and I'm walking down the street and somebody hurt me. I mean, somebody did something to me. Or somebody trying to hurt my mom. Me and my mom walking down the street and somebody trying to hurt my mom. So I see a stick and I pick it up and I hit him in the head with it to make him not hurt my mom. And he dies. And so at 15 years old, for this moment, I'm 15, then they'll arrest me. When I go through the court proceedings, 3 to 4 days later, you say you want to try me as an adult. So a kid that's incarcerated at the age of 15, it took him 3 days to say he's an adult. But let's say I'm the same 15-year-old kid and I didn't commit a crime. Does society see me as an adult? No. Laws say you can't see me as an adult. I can't make an adult decision. But when it comes to crime, you saying that I made an adult decision to commit this crime. But what if I'm placed in a situation where I had to commit that crime and it wasn't a crime to me? It was just a mechanism for me to protect myself. It wasn't a crime at that time. It was just me protecting myself. But you say that I'm an adult. So I feel like that's extremely wrong. And the system doesn't protect its own kids the way that they should protect their kids. So my organization, Priorities, Intentions, and Practical Exchanges, we make it a priority to try to teach kids the right way of doing things. And we do it with intentions. And the practical exchange is to exchange a bad way of thinking for a better way of thinking. To exchange irrational ways of thinking for rational ways of thinking, and to separate the hate that we have towards one another for a more loving approach. And so it takes a lot of work, but it's best to teach them from a young age, because when you catch them from a young age, or when you catch anybody from a young age, you can give a person a different way of saying things and it gives you a different outcome on life.
Got you. Could you talk a little bit about some of the successes you've had with the organization then?
Okay. I can give you this. I can give you today. Here's a success. We just purchased a building for $300,000. So now we own a building, but that comes from us working, and that comes from the city taking notice of everything that we're doing. I just come from New York City last night, earlier this morning, and the trip to New York City was because we are working to try to end the non-unanimous jury verdict. Well, it's ended. Well, we're working to try to get the retroactivity of it. We have functions here within the city. A win for us. When I first came home, in the neighborhood I was raised in, they had a lot of murders going back and forth between some families. And so when I came home, I was instrumental in stopping those murders. My organization was instrumental in stopping it. And so both sides came together, and it was like, man, we ain't gonna stop hating you, but because of what he's doing, we're gonna let you live, and we just want to live also. So that was a big thing. We had a couple of kids that was released to our care, and I could say that they would never go back to jail. They're in school. They are turning in good grades. So that's through us mentoring them.
Okay.
And you can say,
Oh no, that was. When you finish, go ahead. Go ahead.
okay. And so we have a real successful support group for those that's coming home from prison. And because people don't really understand a person that really have done prison. We understand PTSD, but society don't want to associate PTSD with people in prison. So they really have people coming from prison suffering from PTSD, but it's a different name for it also. It's called post-incarceration syndrome, which it operates just like PTSD, but PTSD, you want to give it to, they want to say that it's for people that was in the military. Well, post-incarceration, the post-incarceration syndrome is the same thing. So people that's been incarcerated tend to talk to people that they know that was incarcerated with them more openly than they would somebody that's in society, because I understand you. And so we can speak to one another. So we have a support group that's welcoming. So it's a lot of guys come here and they want to give up. Like, I'd rather go back. So I don't have to pay these bills. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. But we'll support one another and support one another in ways that it'll make you stay and it'll make you hopefully be a success. Even if the success is just you staying free and just you surviving another day in freedom. So
you reference, of course, that you came home, that you were previously incarcerated. And for anyone, for those who may not know your story, you were actually convicted as a juvenile, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Sentenced to life in prison as a juvenile. And so
yes, ma'am.
The experiences you were talking about, you understood and knew firsthand. And your conviction was when you were given parole in 2012 after the 2020. Wow. After the decision to make the ruling that juveniles could not be sentenced to a life term retroactive. And so you were released as a result of that. And so you understand firsthand the idea of being a young person, a teenager, and doing something and realizing certainly that you were not making an adult decision. You were doing, what a kid does. You were in a fight and someone was killed. But it was not, again, you were not thinking like an adult. You were not making an adult decision. You were making the decision of a kid. So you understand firsthand what the actions of trying and convicting juveniles as adults, how that could impact a young person's life. So if we have any questions for Mr. Winn before we go on? Anybody?
Just, I really understand your example of a inadvertent difficult thing that a teenager faces like you did. So there are kids who do horrible things. No, I mean the carjackings. But we don't, even though we know this brain information, we don't figure out it. That even seems like they shouldn't be tried as adults, even those horrible situations. And I think a big challenge is what do we put in place to protect those kids, even so that they have a chance to move forward despite a horrible crime that they may have committed.
Do you want to answer that, Mr. Winn? It kind of leads into a question I was going to ask some other panelists. So
yeah, well, we can, yeah, however.
Okay. Is Ms. Hill Hamilton on? Great. So actually, Ms. Hamilton, I was going to kind of bring that question to your attention. What I want to know from you, and you are the policy director of the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. And so what I want to know from you at the outset of this panel is, the work that you do, particularly as you're looking at juvenile court in Orleans Parish, what are some of the issues that you see with the youth and the families that you come in contact with, and issues in terms of education or race or other problems that we could possibly work on fixing or solving or mitigating before we get to court, before a child finds him or herself in any justice system? What are some of the issues you run across in your role?
Yeah, so I would say the number one issue, and hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. The number one issue that we are, and forgive me, you may hear some toddlers in the background. There you go. I'll keep your window down. So one of the number one issue that we experience is poverty. When we talk to the kids, when we talk to their parents, I don't think we understand when we say poverty, the level of poverty in which our children and their families are experiencing. Meaning that the average household income for many of the families of the children that we serve is less than $10,000 a year. That people don't have running water in the city of New Orleans. People don't have lights. People don't have, if they do have water, it's low water pressure. They don't have stable housing. So I think until we can meet the basic needs of the children that we serve, we're going to continue to see some of the same things over and over. When we're talking, I've had the pleasure of being in the company of many of the children in the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center, in particular, having poignant conversations over the past few weeks, seeing from them, hey, what is it that you need? Asking you, what would have made this, would have made things turn out differently for you? And what we're hearing is that in many cases, they don't know what it is to experience love, that they have started as early as the age of 7. For many of them, it was like between the ages of 7 and 11 is when they had to start acting as adults in their household, meaning waking their younger siblings up for school, providing meals, making sure that those children had what they needed. And also, when you grow up, and Terrance spoke to this a little bit, but when you grow up in an environment where the adults in your family or people in your neighborhood only know a particular way of life, then they're indoctrinating you into that way of life early on. And that's what you're learning. So when we say, oh, these kids know right from wrong, do they? How do you learn right from wrong? Where do you learn that? So in many cases, in the majority of cases, it's survival. Our children are not participating in activities because they want to. They're just as afraid as everyone else is. But what they are saying is that when they walk down the street wearing the same clothes for 3 days in a row, or when they're crying down the street, that we, the people on this call, myself, we walk past them.
Not yet.
That we don't ask them what's wrong, that we don't address them, and that the only time they get attention, the only time they get services is once they've done something wrong. Our children are crying out for help and we're missing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let me ask you this, and actually to any of the other panelists could chime in on this question. It's me playing just a little bit of devil's advocate real quick. I actually have an opinion about this answer, but I want to see what other people think. Is there ever a case where it's okay to charge a juvenile as an adult, in your opinion? And every last one of the panelists who are here could chime in on that if you would like. But I'll start with you, Ms. Hill.
I think what I will say from a policy perspective is that children are being charged as adults for violent crimes, that there is not a lack, that the current administration is actually charging children as adults more so than the previous administration. So that's happening.
Right, we know it's happening.
It's
is it
happening.
Okay?
No, it's not okay. And I'll tell you the reason why it's not okay. But I just wanted to amplify that it's happening, because in the legislation, what is happening is they're saying that like there are children that are participating in these violent crimes. There's no conversation about the root causes, or the things that they need or the things that they don't have. However, it's not okay. What the juvenile justice system is supposed to do is rehabilitate. It's not supposed to punish, right? So rehabilitation and accountability actually happens more so in the juvenile system because education is provided, mental health services are provided, the children's, even just financially, the needs of the children are met financially. And I don't want to say, well, like, I would love to be the person that says that, like, that prison is not a place for our children at all. If we want to keep it real, if we want to be honest, we're failing them in their communities, and that's why they're ending up in prison. And oftentimes we're even hearing sometimes, with all due respect, some of the judges, we're hearing some of our legislators, we're hearing district attorneys say that it's not safe on the streets for them. And sometimes that's why they're receiving longer sentences. And when I say not safe on the streets, meaning that maybe there's a target on their back, meaning that they're not safe in their communities. And prison can't be our go-to place for children. When children are placed in the adult system, they're more vulnerable to the influence of adults who are more experienced. To actually, the saying is, like, you go to prison to learn how to adopt some of those behaviors even more that put you there. But when you are around an older crowd, you're just more vulnerable. Even if you just think about the size of some of the children are just smaller. So there is the PREA Act, which protects children. Yes, that protects children. The Prison Rape Elimination. One second. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, because children are just vulnerable because of their size, because of their mental agility, and what they're exposed to in an adult facility. So yes, being in a facility with children where they are treated like children is most appropriate, because we also want to be mindful of not if, but when they come back to our communities, who do we want them to be?
Anitra and Ashley, I hate to stop this wonderful conversation, but I've just been apprised that Judge Darensburg has to leave us at 6 o'clock.
Well, let's go. Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go. Judge Darensburg, well, we really want to ask you first, and hopefully I'll get a chance for a follow-up question before you leave, but I understand that there is a new mental health court that's being started or has started in the juvenile court system. And if you could tell us a little bit about that, and just kind of how it came to be and why it's important.
Okay. Well, let me first thank you all for this opportunity to come and speak to you. It's always a pleasure to speak to Justice and Beyond. I've been coming here for I guess, a few years, and I'm always excited to get to speak to you. I'm sorry that I can't stay longer. I thought this was started earlier and ended earlier, and so I made an appointment for 6 p.m. But the mental health court, grows out of, and it really is sort of a follow-up to Dr. Shervinson's presentation about addressing the root causes of crime in our community. The mental health court comes out from data. Data is really what drives this. In our court, we would like to be very intentional about the work that we do and be able to utilize data as a tool rather than a picture. And so that from the national standpoint, we learned that up to 70% of youth that are involved in the justice system have a mental health challenge. From that information, what I did was to look at our youth, our specific youth that we see here in New Orleans, the youth that are detained and are incarcerated here in New Orleans. And what I found in our data was that 89% of the youth that are currently being detained have been diagnosed with a mental health issue. They're diagnosed as seriously mentally ill by a psychiatrist. This is the mental health information that comes after the youth is already involved in the system. So what I'm talking to you about now are youth that are currently detained in detention facilities. And 89% of those youth have been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. This comes from the reviews that we see and the data that the Office of Juvenile Justice currently has. Of the youth in non-secure care, 100% of those youth had been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. So what we were able to do was go to the Department of Justice. There was a Community Stabilization and Reentry Act grant opportunity available. And what we did was go to them and present this data to them, along with the successes of mental health courts for juveniles that exist in the state of Louisiana. There's one in Cato Parish, and there's one in Rapides, I believe, Parish, where they have mental health courts that address the issues that youth have that when youth have mental health issues that impact their behavior and the results of their behavior. So that what our mental health court is intended to do, it's not an excuse and it is not an escape of accountability. What it is, in fact, is a way to get to root causes rather than just dealing with those symptoms, as we call them, as behaviors, as Dr. Shervington addressed. What the mental health court will allow us to do is bring in mental health professionals that can get to deal with the real root causes, and that means what are the reasons and get the proper diagnosis. She was correct in that a lot of youth in our system are misdiagnosed, are diagnosed with issues that are far more serious. What we know now today is anyone that was 18 years old that was born, let's say now, 18 years ago was not born here in New Orleans, but rather was born somewhere else because none of us were here because of Hurricane Katrina. I shared that with you because what we have is a lot of trauma involved with our youth over the course of this time. If they were 18, they were not born here. If they were slightly older, they were removed from the community. But what we have are a lot of youth that came back to this community from somewhere else where they had lived in other places. The point in saying that is that we have a lot of trauma and a lot of mental health issues in our court, and this grant allows us to begin to address those issues directly and provide the intense services. What it allows us to do is going to allow us to bring in serious psychiatrists and serious mental health providers, and allow us to even use inpatient care for you that may need that type of treatment, which also allows for us to have more choices for out-of-home placements that are more rehabilitative, more helpful, and more treatment-oriented. So the mental health court is really designed to address an issue that is really one that we currently do not assess for, nor do we address in New Orleans juvenile court. So it's new to us, but a very serious issue that's being addressed in other jurisdictions, that this will in fact be the first juvenile mental health court in New Orleans. Hope that was good.
Got you. Any questions really quick for Judge Darensburg before he leaves?
Yeah.
Ms. Tripp, go ahead.
Judge, what power do you have, since as I understand it, it's the DA who gets to make the call on whether to charge a kid as an adult? What power do you have, and what power do you think you should have to be part of that process so that you can say?
Okay, so but just to do with the mental health court, this is just a question about youth being tried as adults. Mm-hmm. Is it about the mental health court? Your question?
Yeah.
No,
yes. Well, I mean, it's really probably both. Is the youth?
Well, the DA in the mental health court, the DA is a partner, and the charge is not relative to the mental health issue. It doesn't matter what the charge is relative in terms of the mental health court. What they're charged with. They can be charged with anything if they are diagnosed. If we intend to assess for mental health issues and then do a second what is it called? Screening and then assessment and provide services for mental health needs, regardless of what the charge is.
So does that mean but what happens if that child is charged as an adult by the DA?
Well, there is a mental health court in adult court. Adult court has the mental health court that was started by Judge Calvin Johnson. So there's a mental health court in adult court as well. There just isn't one in juvenile court. But I can, if you want, I have a few minutes, I can. I don't know. I saw that my question was going to be about the process of charging youth as adults. And if you wanted me to give you a little brief outline of how that goes, I'm happy to do that before I leave, if that's something that anyone's interested in.
Yeah, well, I think.
Do we have time?
I think you muted yourself.
Do we have time?
I can tell you, yes. I can tell.
Go ahead, please. I
Okay.
think
All
that was
right.
kind
There
of
are
what you're
there are.
looking
Let me give you by way of history, because one of the things that is, it is a very confusing area of the law, and people don't have a lot of understanding of it. But as far back as 1906, in the Constitution of the state of Louisiana, certain crimes were removed from juvenile delinquency, and that means removed from juvenile court altogether. So there are crimes generally, when it started, they were crimes that were punishable by death or life in prison. If a juvenile at the age of 15 committed a crime, was punishable by death or life in prison, that's things like first-degree murder, and those crimes are listed. Those crimes were removed, and they were never allowed to be in juvenile court. They were always going to go to adult court. And what that is typically called is a legislative waiver. And what that means is that the law says that these kids aren't going to do that. It's never done that. But as far back as like 1978, that law sort of changed a little bit, and different crimes were added to that list. So what happens generally is that if it's one of those crimes, if it's one of the crimes that are legislatively decided that that youth, and the child has to be 15 years old, will be brought into adult court. If it's one of those crimes, what has to happen is there has to be a hearing in juvenile court to find that there was probable cause, meaning there was good enough reason to arrest the child for the crime for which they are charged. If the probable cause is found in juvenile court, the case is immediately brought to adult court. The juvenile court is divested of any jurisdiction over that case, and it moves into adult court. There is a second area of the very same law. I can give you the numbers. Children's Code 305A is what I just described. There's 305B. And what happens in 305B is it's still a determination. What this law does is outline the authority of the DA and the courts in dealing with whether youth are going to be tried as adults. And in the instance of 305B, there are another 13 laws. Like, we don't memorize them. We just kind of make sure it's one of them. There are another 13 charges that the DA can decide at some point to try the youth as an adult if they are 15 years old. Those are located in Children's Code Article 305B. If anyone wants to look and see what they are, they're just hard to memorize. So that in that instance, what then happens is the same thing. There is a hearing to determine probable cause, but then the DA has a period of time, 30 to 60 days, depending, I think the law changed, to 60 days to then either file an indictment in adult court or to file a petition in juvenile court. So in the first instance, the DA, there is no choice. The law makes that decision. In the second instance I described, it is the DA that is able to make a determination as to whether they're going to bring the child into adult court. The judges in each instance in juvenile court, the only decision that we get to make is whether there was probable cause to make the arrest for the crime for which they are charged. There is a third way that becomes a little more confusing for the law, that your children can be brought into juvenile court. But in the difference is, in the third instance, it is a case in which is a very egregious case, and it looks at all the facts and circumstances, and that is brought by the juvenile court. The juvenile court can take a case and say, this case is so egregious that our court is not able to administer the punishment necessary for this, or provide the community with the level of comfort, of security in this instance, and the punishment this case needs to be handled in adult court. But in that instance, which is rare, but in that instance, there is a hearing in juvenile court that looks at the facts and circumstances of the case, and not only the legislative or just the option of the DA to make those decisions. But those are the three instances in which cases can be brought from juvenile court into the adult system. I hope I got it succinctly, and if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know I have to be quick. I really apologize that I have to leave you, but because I'd love to be able to, and I'm happy to come back. I'd love to be able to, if anyone had any questions. But if you have anyone has any questions?
Brooke, do you still have a question? Are you muted?
I just wanted to know whether the teen courts work.
The
Do they
teen court is a yes. Well, we have a teen court. The teen court now, that's a juvenile court system, and in our teen court in New Orleans, we've had our teen court since 2018, and it really begins with low level. It began with low level and first time offenders. Over the course of these last, I guess it's now going to be 5 years or so, we've expanded that to other areas of other charges that youth may come in contact with. But what the teen court is, a positive pro-social environment to bring youth into, so that what happens in teen court is teens, it's a real case. Everything's just like a real case, except in this instance, they have agreed to accept the responsibility for whatever the charge is that they've been accused of. So they've accepted responsibility for that, and they go into a teen court. And in that teen court, teens act as the jury. There's a teenager that's the prosecutor. There's a teenager that's the defense lawyer, and there's a teenager that is acting as the judge. And at the end of a hearing with all teenagers, now there's assistance from lawyers, judges, adults, volunteers, college students, high school students. There are all types of volunteers involved. And if you are not the defendant, you don't even know who the defendant is, because kids do come back. I share all of that to say, in all those 5 years, only one kid that has gone through teen court has been rearrested, and no kids have been convicted of another crime, anything of that or anything like that. But what it is, it has become a bit of a club. I want to give credit to everybody in Tulane Law School and some of these Tulane's Law Clinic who really has now taken it on, and Dillard University. These colleges and law schools have taken this on as a project, and they essentially run the teen court. And that just means they put it all together and are there every week to participate in the teen court. But it is one of the programs that we are most proud of, and one of the programs that really also is data driven. This program is driven by the data that tells us if we can intervene in a youth, in certain cases, in low level cases, the quicker we can intervene and place kids in positive pro-social behaviors, the quicker we can get them out of the juvenile justice system here in New Orleans. So thank you for asking about teen court. Teen court is one of our favorite and one of the best programs that we have at the court that allows youth to learn about the justice system, because part of it is definitely learning about the justice system, because as we know, we pull from what we know when we make decisions. And if we don't know anything about it, we don't really have the information we need. So part of it is a know your rights component to the teen court program. Part of it is just knowing how the process works and what's going to happen to you or happen to anyone else at different stages in the process. So having this information at the ready for them, or just a part of their mental arsenal, gives them an opportunity to make decisions that take that into consideration. So thanks for asking about that.
good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anitra, Lisa Richardson has a question if she wants to answer it real quickly.
Yes, let's
Okay.
go.
Judge, I know you have to go. I'm just
You're good.
curious, given the work that we do organizationally, we're very interested in public mental, community-wide population level mental health, and to make the amazing opportunity of a juvenile mental health court come to be, it seems like the public mental health system will have to be bolstered somewhat. Has there been any work on that, or how to make sure that young people can get the services that they need once they go through this process?
Well, look, we are building this plane as we're flying it, to be honest with you, and your help and everybody else's help would be much appreciated, because it is new to us. We will be visiting the mental health court in Cato Parish, and when they said it hasn't started yet. We are really at the stage now where we are putting together a team of folk, and we'd love to have you guys be involved at IWIS, because it is, yes, I agree that the public system will have to be bolstered up. And so we've gotten some input. We've gotten the Metropolitan Human Services District, Tulane University, a School of Psychiatry and stuff. We've got a lot of partners there. But we will be reaching out to you all, because I think that you're absolutely right. The idea, though, is really to bring one of the things that hinders us in the court now is what we are limited to is the institutions that the Office of Juvenile Justice has contracts with, because really we operate through them, because they have the services, if you will, and we don't have the resources to undertake services unless some of the nice things that you guys have done for us to come to the court and do testing and things like that. We don't have access to those services if OJJ doesn't have a contract with that entity. so that what this grant will allow us to do is expand into providing services to you outside of OJJ. That's really the beauty of it. So yes, that will be extremely helpful and much needed in this process. So I will be reaching out to you guys. I thought of it as I saw Dr. Shervington that I wanted to reach out to you.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Darensburg.
Well, I appreciate you, and thanks a lot for all of the work that you do. And please invite me back anytime. I'm happy to come and talk to you guys anytime you like. Okay. I'm sorry I have to leave. I hope that, but if y'all want to know anything, if you want me to come talk to you about anything else, I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks
very
a lot.
much.
You guys have a great evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Betty, can you give me just kind of what we're looking at in time right now?
We are at 6:03, Anitra. We've got 25 minutes, 20 minutes.
Gotcha. So look, then I'm hoping that I still have Terrance and Ashley, and then of course, oh, please, the representative from Dr. Shervington's the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies still in, because I have just some general questions I want to start asking the group. So is everyone still on the call?
Mr. Winn's still on the call. Everybody's still here.
Great. So I guess my first question is, what, and it's kind of been answered in bits and pieces here and there, I guess, but what is in place or needs to be in place in New Orleans to provide youth in New Orleans, in Louisiana, in urban cities like ours, to provide youth with the resources and services that they need, that they're not getting, that results in them getting in the kind of trouble that lands them in juvenile court and, you know, maybe even adult court, unfortunately. What do we need to do? What are we doing that is working? And what are we missing? And how do we fix it? Any thoughts, guys? Oh, that's a hard one, huh?
I bet that Ashley is full of ideas.
Go ahead, Mr. Winn.
I think that you need to like have mentoring programs with guys that's really sincere about mentoring, that them been through these prison systems, and you put them and their jobs are to just target kids that's on the same trajectory as they are, because kids tend to open up to those type of people that's been in prison, because that's who they aspire to be. Those are the people that's more likely who they'll become. And so I think that we kind of like need those big brother programs with people that even if they haven't been through prison, that was once well known in the streets. And you just make that person not just a one time or once a week thing, make it be an everyday thing.
So
even if they have to have more than one kid, but let them be with that kid on a day-to-day basis. And if he's sincere, he's gonna bring about change within that kid.
So more boots on the ground, community level, kind of everybody rolling up their sleeves, you know, and playing a part is what I hear you saying. Anyone else? I'll say this, and we write about it a lot, often in the New Orleans Tribune. I mean, and especially when Ashley was talking, it's just clear when you look at a situation where most of the kids who end up in juvenile court are coming from homes, or many of them are coming from homes where the household income is $10,000. I mean, or there's no running water, or the lights are getting turned off every other day. If we don't do something about the income equity and social economic disparity in this city, we're going to continue to have the issues that we're having, not only in juvenile court, but in adult court with the adults. We have got to get to a point where we understand that, you know, resources and jobs and being able to take care of your family and make a child feel safe because they know they have a home that they can go to, and the water's running and the lights are on and there's food on the table. That kind of safety keeps communities safe. Like, I don't understand why we don't get that yet. But anyway, that's just me. Lisa, any thoughts on what we could be doing more of? What we're
Well, thanks for saying that, Anitra. I was going to say, Ashley, I think you laid it out in a very clear way. If we continue to be comfortable with the level of suffering and neglect that such a large portion of our population is living with day to day, including the children, this trajectory is going to be hard to change even with excellent programs, because as Mr. Winn speaks to, when a child is going on a trajectory that seems like they might need support, we can provide mentoring and we can intervene at that point. But how do we prevent more children from living in circumstances where they're engaging in these kinds of behaviors just to survive, not just for themselves, but for their whole family? So that's, a big, and if I could channel Dr. Shervington, she would talk about our interdependence as humans and the human family and equity of all stripes, racial, financial, health, etc. I think there's that as such a fundamental piece. And then in our work as a public health organization, there are policies, big P policies and smaller P policies. We do a lot of work for many years. We've been doing a lot of work with schools and doing the kinds of things that help to identify when young people are having a hard time when they're in a school setting early on, and trying to determine, does this child have a clinical mental health challenge at this stage, or are they suffering from traumatic exposures? Because the example that Denise gave very quickly, when young people are put on an ADHD diagnosis track, that is treated with medication. When young people are displaying behaviors that seem dysregulated in a classroom or a school setting, and you do a trauma history on them before, by that meaning really having a deep conversation about what the young people are experiencing and engaging their parents and other social supports if needed, that's treated with therapeutic supports and mentoring, and it doesn't turn into a lifetime of medication as the answer to traumatic exposure. We have to get away from that as a society too. So we have to go a little bit deeper in terms of thinking about also young people operating in family systems. So even when we do excellent work with youth and adolescents, if they're going back into households that are struggling and there's no running water and the bills aren't being paid, they're not being relieved of the pressure. So I just feel like we have to think of this as a societal level shift that we need to make, and then look within our health system, our court system, our social supports, our medical system, and look for things that can be supportive of this more compassionate, loving future that we want for the children in our community.
Thank you. Ashley, do you want to chime in?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Definitely echoing everything that Lisa said. So I do think it has to be a societal shift where we think about universal basic incomes, where we think about opportunities for everyone to have an abundance of food. There should not be a hungry person in our state, especially when we see the abundance of money that our country sends, to provide support and relief. We just want to make sure that like we are also taken care of, that there are people that live next door to us that don't have food. So I think thinking about that, kids are often saying like, we need a job, we need a job. Do you at 12? Is that what you should be thinking about, getting a job to feed your family? Or should your family just have enough money to be able to meet your basic needs? So I think the way we think of it, about it culturally, I do think New Orleans in particular is a very unique and beautiful city in that we have an abundance of programs, right? So when there is money for programming, we don't always need new programs, but our programs that we do have need to be strengthened and need to be funded in a way where they can have transportation readily available, where they can weave in mental health services into the programming that they have, where their programming is able to feed the children that they serve. So strengthening the programs that we already have to a place where they can function, but we will not be able to cure this with programming. We have to cure this with attacking the root of the problem, which is true poverty at the root of it, that our families and our children who also are exposed to just an insurmountable amount of violence on a daily basis, the amount of family members that they lose on a regular basis, even teachers who are teaching in the public school system are losing students left and right. We cannot become desensitized to that. And our children are not desensitized to that. They're screaming out, they're hurting. It impacts them every day in their lives.
Thank you. So Brooke had a question that she put in the chat about the violence prevention program that's being started in New Orleans. I'm not familiar with the details of that. Is anyone else familiar with the details of a new violence prevention program that's being started in the city?
We had someone on a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the all the programs that would be utilized to bring kids and bring families to some level of security. I thought, jump in if anybody else from Justice and Beyond remembers exactly all the details, but it was pretty amazing, and it was going to include a lot of monies.
I thought it was a city-funded program, or some of the funding was coming from the city.
I think much is coming from art money, though.
Oh, through the American Rescue Plan money that was provided to the city.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you know what? I will definitely, I don't have any details on that right now, but it's something that has piqued my interest. I want to look into it some more.
Betty or Lane, do you remember much more?
Well, Betty really knows a lot about it. Betty, can you share something?
It's a city health department program, and Ashley may know a little bit about it too, but it's a city health department program through the health department. And I think I think Tulane, LSU are working on it with the physicians from the Dr. Avegno's office. But there is a violence interrupter program that Second Line Group, I can't remember their full name, but the Second Line Group and Ubuntu are putting together along with someone else, and I can't remember exactly who it is, but they just did a press conference this weekend, and it is more violence interrupter. The part I know about is more violence interrupter. When Dr. Avegno spoke to us a couple of weeks ago, she said it was different because it was an ecosystem change. So I'm hoping that we can send this video to her. So, and I'm sure she's heard all this before, but it's really powerful hearing it from all of you people working on it. So that's all I know about it.
Yeah, this is Troy with CRA. I can add.
Oh, hey, Troy.
Hey, I can't speak to the other components well. As Betty said, the Ubuntu Village and Second Line are working at the community level They're going to be violence interrupters at the hospitals, as she spoke to last week, and CRA is providing violence intervention on the school level. So any school that has issues between young people where they believe there is the threat of serious violence, including gun violence, where or serious violence has already occurred, they can make a referral to CRA. We have gotten 21 referrals within 3 months. And about half of those referrals, we have had circles for them. 100% of the circles have reached agreement. About a few of them are still in the agreement phase, but about 6 of the circles have been closed and those agreements have been kept. So we are seeing a lot of interest from schools that are seeing violence and are asking for help.
Troy, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is that part of is that being funded partly by the $5 million?
No, this is all ARPA dollars.
Okay, so so what you're describing is all through the violence prevention or violence interruption?
It is through the health department.
Okay.
We applied for a NOFA just as Ubuntu Village did. But I believe Ubuntu, correct me if I'm wrong, Betty, but has gotten some of the justice system funding as well to do some more expansive work.
That's correct. They've got some of that. Whatever the health department got, then the city got.
Yeah.
I can share a little bit, just very quickly, and Mr. Johnson is the best person on this call to speak about the violence interruption program. So I in no way am an expert on it, but what I know about the violence interruption program is that it is to stop retaliatory violence. So it is to have people that are positioned and trained to be able to work in the hospitals, to be able to work directly in the hospitals to attack retaliatory violence. So that's what the violence interruption is. It's literally like stopping it before it happens. In terms of the $4.9 million that were ARPA dollars that were allocated for diversion and prevention, that money has gone to Commissioner Tanisha Stevens' office. That's where that money is being housed, and is going to provide a position for a person to oversee an assessment center is what's going to happen. So there's going to be a building that is an assessment center that will essentially assess children once they are arrested, be in contact with the judges, and understand if that child needs to be diverted away from the system into community programming, or if that child is determined to be incarcerated, which really would have to be determined by the RAID, which is the risk assessment instrument, is currently what's used. It's not currently used with Fidelity, but that's what that money has been allocated to go to.
Ashley, can I ask a question? When you say diverted, you mean diverted from charges being, like a petition being filed? Because I thought only the DA had the ability to do that.
No, so basically what the RAID does, the risk assessment instrument, like I said, is not used with Fidelity all the time. Some people love it, some people hate it. But what it's supposed to do is to say, like, hey, like if I caught you in the store stealing candy from a baby or something, and this was your first offense and you have straight A's in school, we can make the decision to divert you away from the system. It is not for violent crime. It is not for more serious offenses, but it is, there are specific things where there is like a it's a rubric essentially. So if you fall between like a 1 and a 5, then you can be diverted away from the system. But it's also to assess what additional needs do you need. Do you also need mental health services? Do you also need housing? Do you also need like drug support substance support services? So the assessment center is supposed to work and Commissioner Tanisha Stevens outsourced an organization. I can't think of the acronym right now because there's just too many acronyms to keep up with. But
is that
outsourced
instead?
It's not instead. It's
Not instead. Oh, shucks.
It's not instead. I can tell you.
Because instead does that assessment too. We really need more coordination of these kinds of services. Anyways, okay, thank you.
It's not instead. It's not a local organization. I'll put it in the chat what the organization is. But it's a national organization, and that's where the proposal came from.
Okay.
NICJR is the organization. National Institute for.
Say that again.
NICJR, National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. They were outsourced by Commissioner Tanisha Stevens to put together a proposal of how to spend the ARPA dollars, the $4.9 million dollars for ARPA for diversion. So I think our concern there is with the assessment center, just that it is organized well in a way that if you determine that a child needs specific services, that you're actually able to connect them with those services.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. Any more questions, guys? Because I think we're looking at our last 5 minutes. So go ahead, Brooke, your question.
Sorry to hog the room here. I'm just trying to find out, do we, there seems like a lot of overlap here. Is there any way that we, can, and Ashley, I would guess you might know this answer, but maybe you do, Liz. It just seems as though we have two things that are doing a lot of the same screening or whatever for possibly the same risk group, right?
So
I think it was said that by several people that there needs to be more coordination or some coordination.
Guys, I don't want to, Elaine, let me interrupt. It's 6:26. I do not want to leave this meeting without Juliana's question, and it was one of our questions too. What is gonna, we've got a legislative session coming up. What is it that we are, Ashley and Lisa and Mr. Winn, what is it that we as a community need to be doing? Because Ashley, talk about what's happening. We may be a little over 6:30, guys, but Ashley, what's going on legislatively?
So legislatively, we have a special transition committee that is specifically focused on New Orleans. That is not something that's common. Representative Royce Duplessis is a friendly person that's on that committee. We don't know, there has not been transparency. We actually sent a letter asking for transparency from that committee. We don't know what that committee's meeting about. We don't know what they're talking about. So our assumption is that it is to specifically focus on crime in New Orleans, because that's what the administration has been laser focused on. We anticipate in legislative session, so there is going to be a special session in January. There's an organizational session that's taking place January 8th, I believe, to determine what committees and who will sit on which committees. And then after the 8th, which is the inauguration day of the new governor, we anticipate that there will be a special session. We don't know yet if that special session is going to be on redistricting, if it's going to be on crime, or if it's going to be on insurance. I think we're all praying that it's going to be on insurance. There may be more than one special session. It's possible that it'll teeter really close to Mardi Gras if there's more than one. In terms for the normal legislative session, we're anticipating the usual things to come up. What we're anticipating to come up is lowering the age. We're anticipating truth and transparency, which was the bill that was in 3 majority Black parishes last session that would allow children's information to become public through a database. That bill did die because there was a huge fiscal note that would have impacted the clerk's office. Hopefully it doesn't go through and has lost momentum and does not resurface. Those are some of the things that we're anticipating coming back. Preventatively, LCCR and other community organizations, we are working on trying to ensure that children have state IDs and birth certificates when they are released from secure care facilities, because that has been a huge barrier where a lot of the onus of it have placed on the children to obtain just a state ID or just their vital documents, and it's been a challenge getting them. So we're working on some legislation that will allow that process to be easier for them when they come home.
And Ashley, thank you so much for that. I don't have any substantive additions, but just underscoring holding breath a little bit around the incoming administration and the specific focus on New Orleans that's outsized and doesn't feel particularly friendly, to be frank.
All right. Any other questions, guys? Well, I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank Justice and Beyond for asking me to moderate. Betty?
Well, we can turn it over to Val. Val, are you still on the call? Not sure she is. I guess I'll go. I'm going to let Arissa say a prayer, but I will say that we are taking a break the rest of this month and we'll come back in January. We are planning a big event in February, guys, that we hope we'll let you all know about. That's going to be really interesting. And I won't even tell you what it is because it's gonna be a good big surprise. But I think that's it. Arissa, you want to close this out?
Okay,
Thank you, Anitra.
Welcome.
And everyone.
Dear Heavenly Father and Mother and sister and brother, thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you for the wisdom of all the people on this call. Protect us as we go through this season of Christmas and Hanukkah and all the other things we're celebrating right now. And please stay with us and bring peace to the world and to all of our minds as we support each other in all of our endeavors. Amen.
Thank you all for being here.
Bruh. Oh no.